few faces, see some new ones, so I look forward to meeting with you and networking a bit. We'll just go over the agenda really quick here. So we're going to have our keynote speaker, Pete Ryer, and he's going to come up and he'll be process operations specialist. Execution excellent starts here. So we're looking forward to that. This is Chris Postel. We're from Progressive Plan. We're sponsoring this event, so again, thank you all for coming. And this afternoon we're going to be having a little workshop, and I'll let Chris touch a bit on that.
That's Curtis. I don't know if he introduced himself.
Curtis?
He said, I think he forgot himself there. Like you mentioned, Pete Ryer's got some good stuff to talk about. We got a nice award. We got some representatives from John McClay's family here, and Gord's going to accept an award on his behalf. Huge part of our industry, huge part for a lot of us personally. And then we have an open mic discussion with facilitated by Dave Goody, and that should be exciting, fun. The big thing that we want to do here is community, bring people, owners and clients alike, and really kind of build a collaboration mindset and really work together to develop proper practices and processes and efficiencies, right? So really appreciate everybody taking the time to come up, and no, it's nice. A lot of you guys came from a few hundred kilometers away to a few thousand, so it's nice. We really appreciate the commitment. So, and with that, I guess, Pete, if you're ready.
Thank you.
I thank Ted and Chris and Curtis for inviting me here, and thank you all for giving me this opportunity to talk. So Ted did a pretty good job on the bio on the thing, so I don't want to go over all of that in detail. Suffice to say, I'm 40 years now out of working what you would consider the client side. So I started in 1980 in power engineering. I've spent my entire career in gas plants and oil refineries. If you spend enough time as an operator volunteering to work on turnaround teams and project teams, suddenly, although you've set your whole life towards operations, you're now a maintenance guy. So I'm now a maintenance guy. Execution excellence starts here. That's kind of going to be the Ryer process operations, call it keywords. I don't mean it starts with me, and I'm hoping my presentation is going to make it pretty clear. So the road to excellence, it's really not much of a sightseeing tour. I think you've all realized that by now. I think it's best to understand the road to excellence as an expedition. There's going to be a lot of stops along the way. There's going to be a lot of interruptions along the way. Every one of us in this room plays a piece of it. Excellence can only happen when every piece comes together. That doesn't mean you can't have a good event. It doesn't mean that your event was a failure, but did you achieve excellence? By my definition, you've only achieved excellence if you get everything right. So today I'm going to talk about some of the things that, as a turnaround manager working on the client side, you got your expensive process, you've got your expensive scheduling, everything's supposed to be great. Here's some of the stuff I ran into. Turnarounds are one of the most dynamic project management challenges in existence, and arrival at excellence requires many different pieces. I'm calling that out because the new tendency in our industry is to PMBOK everything. And the PMP guys, they got it together, and if I got 3 blocks of Manhattan to develop, those are the guys I want doing it. Dynamic project management is not PMBOK. Doesn't mean we're throwing out PMBOK, just means that we have to be a little more on our feet. Of course we need a process. There's lots of people in this room that talk about processes. We need a process because we've all worked the gunslinger mentality. I loved it as an operator. I made shit piles of money as a gunslinger, but it's not the right way to do business. We know we need a schedule. We got people like Ted that talks to us about that. Nowhere, I think, has IT helped us out more potentially than with modern scheduling tools. Right? If Ted didn't already have this covered, I would go on and on and on about how people have $10,000 worth of P6 on their desk, and they might as well be using Microsoft Project. So I'll leave that to Ted. I want to talk about timeline and scope. I want to talk about who owns timeline and scope, and how you produce timeline and scope, and how that's where excellence in turnaround execution has to start. And none of us in this room can do this. So this is a miss that we have to help our clients get past. Commitment to timelines. We need to have commitment. Commitment means that if the vice president looks and sees that this thing that she said was going to get done isn't getting done, that there's consequences. The only way we're gonna get commitment to a timeline is if we have a long-range plan. That long-range plan should come out of our master scheduler's office, and it should be a P6 document, and it should be the master document that controls everything. I'm gonna talk a little bit about how to build that plan, because I've come to the conclusion that every time I bring up long-range planning, people panic, and I panicked the first time I was assigned to it. I wanna talk then about scope, because what do we need from our clients? We need to know when they wanna do something, and what it is they'd like us to do, right? I mean, that doesn't seem like a big ask, but I think everybody in this room has been challenged to get those answers out of it. I want to talk about scope collection and approval because I think people make it way more complicated than it should be in this day and age. We'll talk about why that is. And then at the very end, I want to touch on scope control too. Scope control would be a part of your turnaround process, or should be a part of your turnaround process. And theoretically, I'm not talking about the process, but there is a tie in there. So if I make it that far through the presentation, we'll talk about that. So the long-range plan. This is the most important piece of what I have to say today. The long-range plan has to be real, right? So that's not, you go out and ask your operators, oh, what do you think we should build next year, right? It has to be a real plan. It needs to be a meaningful plan. What makes a real plan meaningful? It's a meaningful plan when the facility manager and the director of operations expect it to be met. That makes it a meaningful plan. So it has to have leadership backing. It needs to be a plan that the asset owners and management team stand behind and expect to be met. When I say expect to be met, this is maybe dates me age-wise. So back in the 80s, if you had an expectation and you didn't meet it, there was consequences. And I kind of like to drive the industry back to that. This is where I usually start to see panic in people's eyes, and it's not reasonable. The plan needs to see a minimum of 5 years into the future with clarity. Like, you need to be able to tell me that in 2023, on August 23rd, you're taking this refinery down for 17 years. You need to be able to do that as a facility manager. That's what I mean by clarity. Once you've got that, developing a 10-year plan is easy, just double the 5. How important is it? I want to deal with this before I go into how we do it, because this question comes to me all the time from my people. Why should we do all this work? What are we going to gain from it? And they don't want to hear, my kind of namby-pamby, it leads to excellence stuff. Accountants aren't really focused on excellence. So I'm going to answer a question with a question, because, and I know that's rude, but in all the years I've been answering this question, the best answer I've come up with is this: a question. And it doesn't have to be the turnaround teams I'm talking about. How can any of your provider teams possibly have any hope of executing anything with excellence, or even executing anything successfully at all, if the operations team and the asset owner have no idea what they want and when they want it? Pretty straightforward, right? This is what I thought when I was assigned it first time through. If somebody tells you to build a 10-year plan for a refinery complex that covers everything you're going to do for the next 10 years, this is a fairly common way to feel, but it's a one bite at a time problem. One bite at a time, what are we going to start with? Let's start with what we know, what everybody in this room knows, what everybody running a regulated facility knows. You know your regulatory integrity inspection requirements. I mean, you personally might not know them, but you've got an integrity team, you've got an engineering team. You know these dates. You know these requirements. What drives outages nowadays? Back when I started, we did an outage every year, just because we did it that way. And that was a great way. I wish we'd do that again, but that's not how it's done anymore. Right? So step one, call integrity into the room. Determine the next inspection dates and required frequencies. Police this. Right? You're not calling integrity into the room to ask them about when we should have shutdowns or when we should do this. You're asking them for a spreadsheet telling you every vessel when it's due, every PSB when it's due, every critical valve when it's due. Right? You're going to get a spreadsheet full of dates. Then you're going to send integrity out of the room, because that's all the input we want from them at this time. You're going to bring operations into the room. Now, when I say operations, I'm not talking about the 2 guys you hired out of the 4th class power engineering class last week. I'm talking about your senior operators, the people that keep your facility. Right? You bring them into the table. And you need to be thoughtful here, and you need to do some talking, because over the last 50 years, outages have become maintenance backlog cleanup receptacle. You need to make sure you communicate to your people what you actually want them to do. You actually want them to sort this list of work into total outage required. Not would be convenient, not if we're down anyway, we might as well do this, would be required. That's one list. Most facilities nowadays are designed so that you can have a whole other category of unit outage required. I'm going to get to why that's important in a minute, but separate that out. This last category, I've put that on and off the slide 100 times. This should be maintenance work in any reasonable size facility. If you have an O&M team, if you have a work management team, if you have maintenance planners, this should be maintenance work. It's never really going to be, and there's always going to be overflow. So you are usually going to be pushed into bringing some amount of that work into schedule. When you bring this work into schedule, it's not coming from turnaround budget. And it will go through your master scheduling. And the maintenance team will be allowed to execute this work, providing it doesn't impact anything else. This work is cancelable, because it can be done anytime. Step 3, build the 5-year plan for the total outage. Just the total outage work, the first group that we sorted out. It's getting easier by the second here now. So now we've got a big spread of dates, so let's be a bit thoughtful about it, because if it's like a normal facility going into this, you've been running on chaos management and doing the goat rodeo thing, your dates are, there's no rhyme or reason to it. So you're gonna have to pull some dates out. You're gonna have to know from your senior leadership, what is our tolerance for NCR? If you have the ability to do a year or 18 months of NCR, it gives you more flexibility on what you're gonna do here. If your senior leadership is saying 0 NCRs, then that's your marching orders. So in order to make this into a reasonable plan, we're gonna have to pull some stuff back into, say, 2021. And we'll create 2021, and it's gonna cover 2021, 2022, and 2023. And then we're gonna declare that we're gonna have another total outage in 2024, and we'll pull things in. Once you've gone through this a couple of times, then SAP's gonna be spitting it out already formatted for it. Because once you set the dates, like these dates don't, you know, Integrity has the dates, they're fixed dates. The only reason they're spread out all over the place is because of the chaos management system that we've been using. Step 4, I said I was gonna come back to this. This work we sorted out is unit outage required. What I mean by that is you don't need a total outage. This is a refiner over here that can be isolated, blinded, and taken down. This is a dehydration plant over there, a refrigeration skid over here. Those things can be taken down with the facility online. If you can take things down with the facility online, A, you don't have to do a 24-hour show. You can work 6 and 1s on 10-hour days, and you can get DFL costs down in the $150 an hour range by not having a night shift, by spreading your work out. So again, this is why I'm not bringing too many people in the room. Facility management and the operators, the senior operators, they need to decide this. This is their work. So they need to thoughtfully put that work into the list the way it needs to go. Now you just call in somebody like Ted, you drop the whole thing into P6, call it something clever like long-range major maintenance plan. Right? This is a part where people react funny. I'm telling you, you're done now. If you are a facility management team, you're done now. And let me tell you why you're done. Let's do a reality check. Who's the client? I know there's a whole bunch of people that are up in the air now. You built a 10-year plan, you didn't even ask me. You're right, I built a 10-year plan. I didn't ask any of those people because they don't matter as far as building the plan. What matters is compliance. So who's the client? Projects aren't the client. Projects are the service team. And I don't think there's a service team in our industry that hates to be told that more than the projects group. Field engineering is not the client. They're also a service team, although they usually have a better grip on the fact that they're a service team. The asset owner, operations management, they are the client. The client owns the work, and the client owns the timeline, full stop. The rest of us need to comply. Right? That's what we do. But we have to have a timeline first. Therefore, all you have to do as a facility manager now is circulate a plan. Right? I'm going to show you how the rest of it gets populated. You circulate that plan out to all the individual teams. Projects now knows when your total outages are, and they know when your unit outages are. They can write their notifications, process them through work management, and get them into the system. Years and years in advance. Nothing's stopping them from doing that. Because you provided them with a 10-year plan. And so that's their accountability now. That's how come you were done. Same thing for field engineering, same thing for facility management. Asset owner is operations manager. There are exceptions to that, right? If any of you have ever worked overseas, there's different models in overseas arenas. There are models where operations is also a provider, where the asset owner is a complete standalone. We're working in Western North America, so we're not going to address that very much, other than to recognize as professionals, the way we're doing it isn't the only way it's done. And there are still people in our country doing things the way I learned to do them with annual outages. The big co-op refinery in Regina does annual outages. You can build an entirely different plan than what I'm talking about if you're doing annual outages, because even when you screw up, you only screwed up by 11 months. 11 months from now, you're going to be able to fix it. And you're building a 5-year outage schedule, a screw up has bigger consequences. So now, how does this all happen? The vice president says, I want to have a long-range plan, and then forgets all about it. Well, then that's what's going to happen. There's not going to be any long-range plan. So senior leadership, in order to be accountable, they need to look and see that what they're asking for is being done. This doesn't take a huge time commitment. We're not asking the vice president of operations to get down in the weeds with us here. Take a look at the plan every couple of months. Is it different every time you look? Because if it is, you need to have a chat with your team. What kind of a 10-year plan changes every 6 months? Right? Most places nowadays have some kind of commitment on senior leadership. Usually, I'm sad about this, but it's usually driven by the EHS department. There's usually some kind of thing where senior leaders have to walk the ground on their sites, on some kind of a site, and produce some kind of meaningful EHS report. Well, I'm a guy that likes to get his money's worth, so if you're going to walk the ground anyway, pay attention to what's going on. When you get back to the facility manager's office, talk about what you've seen going on. Is that on the plan? You just seen $2 million worth of work being executed. Is it in the 10-year plan? If it's not in the 10-year plan, find out why. That's accountability from a leadership level. It's not about them doing the work. It's not about them being down here in the weeds. It's about them knowing what we're doing. Have you ever been, and I don't know if anybody did, I don't believe anybody's never worked in a facility where this has happened. Suddenly everything's running fine. You get a notice through leadership from integrity, we have to take this plant down within the next 3 weeks for a 2-week outage because we're completely out of compliance and the government's had it. That is the definition of failure. That is a complete failure, and it is at the senior leadership and facility management level. Nothing any of us could have done could have prevented this. That comes from not having a 10-year plan. The opposite side of that is if you're the facility manager and I walk into your office, can you, with a few keystrokes, bring your 10-year plan up on your computer and tell me the month, year, and date of your next 3 outages? Because as a facility manager, you should be able to do that. And if you can't do that, you are not providing the leadership that's required to execute with excellence. Success without a plan? Come on. What do we call that? That's luck. Right? That's all it ever is. Right? Some people are really lucky. I've never been lucky. That's probably why I go down this direction instead. Execution excellence is never a function of luck. If you pulled off this awesome outage totally on luck, that's not excellence. That's just luck. Okay, so I'm going through this quicker than I thought I would, so that's good.
So I have a question then.
Excellent.
Around budgeting. So obviously we're looking at the assets that we need to take offline to repair, for example, but now there's a forecast in expenditures. So how does that fit in?
So that's taking us a little bit off topic. So the reason that I'm starting here is if your turnaround team, if I as your turnaround manager have your 10-year plan, then my team can well in advance of your budget requirements generate class 3 estimates for the work that's coming up. I know what work you got, and I know when you're going to execute it. I can put a team on the ground in 6 months and give you a class 3 estimate that you can take to the bank. We'll come in 100%. I Again, it's why the 10-year plan is important. You can't start an outage 4 months out. I mean, 4 months out, even in a compressor battery, you're not trying for excellence if that's what you do. In a refinery, most meaningful turnaround plans for a petrochemical facility or refinery, you're going to be looking at 24, 28, even 36 months. I built, with my team, I built a very scalable program, and I could run from 6 months up to 36 months with different nuts and bolts and pieces. I built that out of an AP networks process. Operations owns the scope. So I'm switching topics now, so I should say, anybody else want to talk about timelines before I move on? So we've established leadership owns the timeline. Was I clear on that, or did everybody get what I was saying? If your vice presidents and directors don't care about your timeline, then it's go Rodeo City, and I got a list of operators that'll sign up in a heartbeat. Right? You know, that's 16 hours a day, 60 days straight, all double bubble. Who doesn't want it? Well, I'm 60 now, I don't want it.
What do they say? Chaos is cash?
Chaos is cash, exactly. That goes with the whole goat rodeo. Once you're in a goat rodeo, chaos is cash. Think about it for a second, you know, because I run into this one even more than the timeline. Once a facility has a turnaround team, everybody in the operation team say, well, that's those guys. Well, that's not us. How can it be us? Right? Here's why I don't think, I'm the fox. Me and my team, right? The operations manager and his team, they own all the hens. So if you're gonna say I'm developing scope, then me and my foxes, we had a vote and all the hens are in scope. Now that sounds silly when you say it that way, but if I was working for Saudi Aramco, that's how come they don't have failures. All the hens would be in scope, right? Operations would have blinded the facility out the day before I got there, and we would come in and we would do every valve, every vessel, right? That's what I meant by the different model in different parts of the world. In Canada, we can't do that. In North America, we can't do that. You gotta control your scope to control your total spend. So, most of the time, a reasonable operations manager should get this piece, right? So then why is it that virtually every operations team I've ever worked with, and I don't know what you guys experience with it, they all want hand. You walk into the room and say, oh good, what's our scope? Well, I'm here to execute scope. I mean, I'm not here to develop scope. Scope development is a lot of work and it's a lot of stress. The stress comes from you didn't put it in scope and then 6 months later it comes up. Now you gotta go tell the plant manager that you're shutting down the plant, right? I get that. And I get why everybody wants out of it. But we're the foxes. You can give us the hens if you want. It'd probably be better to pick which ones you want us to take. Scope development. And I know there's some planners and schedulers in the room. I have no idea how come people still start their turnaround 18 or 24 months out with an operator and his team sitting down with a maintenance backlog printout this high. What is the $50 million worth of SAP investment for? How did that happen? How is it that your orders need to be sorted in bulk off paper copy? Right? It should never happen. Remember the long range plan? We talked about it earlier. So we provided the long range plan to Integrity. In fact, they helped us build it. So please don't tell me, after doing all that work, that Integrity didn't immediately write all the notifications for the work they just identified and pass them off to work management, who referenced our long range plan and immediately revision coded everything into the right route. Right? Why would that not have happened? The only reason that doesn't happen is an accountability issue. It was somebody's job to make sure somebody did their job. So now all the integrity work's in there. We gave this to projects and fields engineering too, didn't we? Why didn't they write notifications? Why is it that projects people like to show up on my job site 30 days out and say, oh, we're gonna do this work and this work and this work? Well, I don't see it anywhere in the scope list. Oh, well, we don't work from orders. Well, if you don't work from orders, you're not working on my site. It's just that simple. This gets you 80% of your work. And it didn't cost you and the operations team very much. I could drive almost any reasonable management team to produce a 10-year plan in 2 weeks. So with 2 weeks' work, and then they had to do their work, and then they had to do their work, now we got 80% of it. Where's the rest of it's coming from our daily notifications? This is another pet peeve of mine. Notifications need to be fully processed on receipt, people. Everybody has a notifications meeting, right? Usually people are thinking of, oh, well, we gotta decide what the break-in work is. They get the break-in work and everybody runs out the door. All of this goes into backlog. Yes, you wanna get the break-in work out. You wanna get the crews out. You know, I understand the day-to-day maintenance crises here. But you already have your supervisors and your work management people in a room. You've got 6 orders that came in last night, processed. Are they 3 weeks out, regular scheduling? Are they turnaround related? Do they need to be kicked to my team so that I can look at them and get them properly into the long range plan? Do that every single day at the notification meeting. And then you don't end up with 3 years down the road a stack of work like this. And asking some operator to figure out what we need to do here. That's the whole point. That's why people are spending 40, 50, 60, $80 million on SAP and Maxima system, but we're not using them. At least my experience is we're not using them. I'm happy to hear about somebody who's got a team that's doing it perfectly.
Well, so Peter, I think that's a classic example of the no amount of technology will make up for a lack of methodology.
Exactly.
Right, and competent people. If we don't have a methodology and we don't have competent people, the technology is not gonna save us. Correct? Anybody comment?
I feel I witnessed as we went through the 80s and into the 90s and started bringing in more and more of these marvelous IT tools. And I'm a techie guy, so I loved it all and absorbed it all. But I kind of have a feeling that people thought things were going to happen on themselves. And I know a lot of people that I help with their home tech. They're wanting to know if they should buy this particular specific piece of software that makes banners or something. Your computer's shipped with Microsoft Office, right? You've already got a $1,000 Office suite there, and you want to go buy a $400 Bundersmith, right? Like, learn to use the software. The reason your computer's not building your banners is because you haven't learned to use the software. Then I think the same thing is that with the CMS system. Like, nobody, it's twofold, right? I came from a company that was, we only put in a base platform, right? So we didn't have any SAP front end, and that would be okay if you had an entire workforce full of hackers, but we didn't turn out to have it. So we ended up with an SAP system hardly anybody knew how to use. Okay, and I'm right way ahead of schedule. I don't have a clock.
So Peter, in terms of risk-based scope review, like there's a point where you get to actually take that 80% and review it.
Yes.
And
See, that's where we should start being involved.
yeah.
That's what my point here about scope development is when we walk into the room, they should be handing us the scope. And then we will conduct scope reviews and the risk-based reviews, and we can build the risk registry, but we can't do anything if we don't know what you want done. If we don't know what, and we don't know when. And the when is sometimes more important than anything, because here's what I'm getting back a lot of. People invest in these 26-month turnaround processes, and then the complaint comes back, well, we got a 26-month process, but we never really actually get started until 8 months out. Well, I don't know if any of you ever worked with an AP process, but it's a sweet system if you start 28 months out. If you wait to 8 months out, when you launch your system, virtually everybody in the company gets hate mail instantly, because you're already years behind. So that's part of what that we all got to do to help the clients understand. This is big stuff, and it's a mystery to me why the clients don't get it, because in a typical refinery or gas plant complex, the turnaround team, through the project's work plus the turnaround work, will typically burn between 50 and 75% of the operating budget for the facility. It's a mystery to me why we can't get more focused on RPs. Why they put so much micromanagement into managing that other 40%, and they just kind of want to ignore the turnaround and hope that it works out. You know, hoping it works out when you're dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars, and a 2% screw up can be tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. It doesn't seem like the right process. But my point here is we know that already. We have people like TED, we have people like Progressive, we have people like AP Networks. I mean, they're all over the world. Everybody knows these pieces. Many of us have worked with, like I had the schedulers, I had the process, I had everything. What I didn't have was reliable scope and reliable timeline. Because my team can't do that.
That's a really good point you make. John Clay taught that 90% of your scope is known 30 days after your last outage.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you already know what you need to do right after you've done
So,
it.
and John and I have actually spoke at length about that before he passed, and I would say that 80% of your scope's known 10 years out if you're doing it
So,
right, because it is not hard to build it. I just, like, it really, I expected to be challenged when I went through the timeline of you're making it seem easier than it is, and I expected to have, but this is a very astute crowd. It really is that easy.
Well, you know how
But I think
your
the client
equipment is
doesn't know.
designed to last, correct? You have X amount of years of the life of your piping, your equipment. You can plan for that based on that general knowledge.
Well, and even if you didn't want to get that deep into it, you have regulations, yeah. I mean, what's driving most of our facilities nowadays? Regulatory compliance. I'm sad being a power engineer from the 80s. I'm sad that it's come to the fact that we only do the work that regulatory compliance makes us do. That's not how I was trained, but it's where we are in our industry right now. So as professionals, recognizing the Western Canadian industry is only going to do work that has to be done, then excellence becomes making sure we're doing the right work at the right time. Because failure is always taking down a facility for an unplanned outage. Like that is, there just is no worse job you could have done than to have a 2-week unplanned outage in the facility because somebody forgot to do an inspection on such and such.
yeah, so unfortunately, permit to operate is the only thing we need to worry about, Western Canada.
Yeah.
So some of the other things do fall away, but, so, back on the topic with John, so we got to a point on the long-range plan in India that is a 10, 15, 20-year plan.
That's
And
awesome.
then last year, John McClay and I went to India and did the risk-based scope review on a major turnaround 9 months out, which was
That's
wonderful because they had all that turnaround asset integrity and process integrity and maintenance outage kind of work all there. And then, as you said, we went through with operations, inspection, reliability, maintenance to do the risk-based scope review in a week, and we dropped another 30% or something off of that.
9 months out is about right.
Well, I'll tell you what was in.
You should be, if, I would
That
like
was
to
their
see
final
scope
pass,
freeze
yeah.
come even a little earlier, but
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you don't have a solid scope freeze at 9 months out,
Yeah.
you're not on the path of excellence. You might not even be on the path of success. And I am going to separate those two out like I did at the beginning. I don't say you have to achieve excellence to be successful, but I see a lot of people not getting either success or excellence.
I think it's part of that. Then also the long-range plan is subject to a couple of other things like the market that we
Yeah.
can't totally predict.
So a long-range plan is not a
contractor-
static document.
Contractor availability, sister facilities, like there's a lot of other things
Contractor
to think about.
availability should not be a problem if you have a long-range plan. If I'm your turnaround manager, and I know that I have an outage in 2021, 2023, 2027, and I don't have my contractors lined up, now as my boss, you should probably come down on me.
So I'll give you an example. The Burnaby refinery is down right now because in February, you can do a turnaround in Vancouver and they're getting cheaper rates from the contractor because the contractors, it's a slow time, right? Which
Yeah,
is not
so
a bad
they're
strategy.
planning it to
Not a bad
meet
strategy,
the
right?
rate.
Co-op refinery has to go down every year because the farmers are waiting for fertilizer fuel and, that's a no-brainer, right? So there is some kind of market, there are some other strategies. Would you guys agree? Like, is that
Yeah.
in your experience? Yeah. It's a good discussion.
Well,
And we
the
can carry
other
on with it
thing-
later,
The
but-
other thing about the accountability is, once you build a 10-year plan, you can't forget about it.
Yeah.
Right? The VP's still got to be looking at it every few months, still got to be calling out his managers every few months, right?
So
Are
I
you
t-
following the 10-year plan? Are you reviewing your 10-year plan? When somebody starts talking about a big new chunk of work, the first question the vice president should be asking is it in the plan? Right? I didn't see that addition to the plans.
Yes, I totally agree with that. The other thing, when we talk about process availability over 10 years, for example, what are we looking at? 98.7% throughput? reliability, throughput, availability, which means maybe I'm gonna take a total outage, and I like your idea of we're gonna take a couple of unit outages. Then we might even take a couple of pit stops, because that might give us 0.5% over 10 years. That's a lot of
It
freaking
is.
money, right? Because instead of taking the whole damn thing down and trying to squish everything in, it's like, wait a minute, let's be a little bit more strategic here over the next 10 years. We might be able to increase that. Does anybody
So
have
my
any input, like
primary
pit stops
driver-
and units outages?
My primary driver for pushing my company down that road, for splitting all the work out like that, was strictly budget control, right? There is no more expensive way to do work than during a total outage,
Correct.
right? So even if you're knocking it out of the park on a total outage, 800-900 men, 24 hours a day, 220 to 250 on the DFL in Fort
Exactly.
Saskatchewan, that would come from AP Networks numbers, that would be considered a pretty respectable DFL. So I just completed 2019 doing unit outage work. I did 55,000 man hours worth of work. I spread it over 8 months, working 6 and 1 day shifts only. We took every long weekend off as a 4-day weekend, and my DFL was $175. Now, you can never do $175 an hour on a total outage, because as soon as you add the night shift in, you get all those other indirects. Once you got all those indirects, then your cost goes up. But it shows you what can be done.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And when you, and that's also the same argument for convincing work management that we are not the cleanup for maintenance backlog. You can't afford it. You can't afford to have my team do your maintenance backlog. It's the most expensive maintenance on the planet. Right? It's just not how it works.
So Pete, one more thing then, capital projects integration.
So I push that there can only be 1 leader in an outage.
Okay.
And that might be how come I'm currently looking for a new engagement too. The people on the projects team don't really like to hear that, but I think I put a lot of thought into it, and I spend a lot of time with very senior people at AP, and I share a lot of ideas with some of them guys. If projects is going to run their separate show, you're not going to achieve excellence.
Totally.
I'm just going to say that outright. Like, there's nothing I or anybody else can offer you. Excellence requires 1 leader. So if projects wants to execute during one of my outages, they need to write the damn notifications so that I know the work's coming, and then they can do all that pre-work, but they need to transfer that work to my PM for execution, right? And here's some simple reasons why. I have a paper on this if anybody's interested. I have quite a few papers. This presentation I'm doing comes from 2 papers that I've written on LinkedIn, but I have a paper specific to this cost control question as well. If I'm in here executing and I've got my contractor and my contractor team, okay? So that contractor team has a management team, has a foreman team, has a timekeeping team, an administration team, most likely has a couple of engineers. These are all indirects to my outage, right? Indirects can be controlled, right? When you go to business school, we don't call them directs and indirects, we call them fixed costs of business and variable costs of business. Indirects are a variable cost of business. How I can control that is I can tell the projects team, no, send us your work, we'll execute with my contractor. Because the minute the projects team shows up with their own contractor,
And no
just
crane.
your indirects, right? And then the in-house engineering team hires their own contractor. Now you've tripled your indirects, right? Like, I literally was pulled out of operations into setting this stuff up because the facility I was working on had brought in AP to do forensics DFL calculations over their previous 5 years, and they came to the conclusion that they were currently executing at $572 an hour.
Whoa.
Jason Switzer said he never actually ran into a case that extreme.
We should work there.
So this is the same facility that I just closed out 2019 at 175. So, you know, maybe that speaks a little bit to my credibility. I did take this facility from 572 to $175 in 4 years.
So I like that. 2 places we save on money on a turnaround is scope or indirects. And in my experience, you can save 20% of a total outage just on indirect?
I've
Controlling your
worked
indirect.
outages, you know, and not even really, not like Fort Sask level, not like a Scotford outage, you know, say maybe 110, 115,000 man hours. So not small, but not 500,000 man hours either. I've seen as many as 4 GCs on site. Right? You want to know, there's no secret how you get to a $600 DFL. Let everybody do their own thing. You'll be at $600 in a heartbeat. Right? Yeah, we got to get away from that societally. We've become a real give each other a hug society, and that's okay from a social point of view. But we got to stop letting it influence how we work.
Isn't that next on the agenda where we all get up and hug?
Yeah, I think, we do exercises and stuff.
Here's another thing that I used to say as a manager, again, might be the reason why I'm currently unengaged. Okay, I lost my track. We're going to go on scope control now. I didn't really have a lot to say about this. Scope control obviously is a part of your process, right? And so at the beginning I told you I wasn't going to talk to you about process, but I want to bring in scope control because there's some accountability issues with scope control that have screwed me over and over again, so I want to bring it to your attention. So obviously by scope control, I mean added work tracking and approval, found work tracking and approval, removed work tracking and approval. This one here, quite often people have a lackadaisical attitude about. I encourage you not to allow your clients to do that. The remove work tracker is every bit as important as the added work tracker. I don't even know how a facility manager thinks he's watching his budget, what he's reporting to his vice president every day. You need to know what you removed so that you can do the math with what you added, so that when you phone your vice president, you're not just making stuff up, right? But scope control, approval accountabilities, and now I'm talking here. And every one of us has had this problem. So I'm out on my site at 5 o'clock in the morning and my night shift team tells me, you know, we ran into such and such a vessel, we're gonna have a 3x3 flush patch. Integrity says you're not starting it back up unless you do. So by 6 o'clock, I've got all the paperwork and the scope control documents, and I'm sitting there tapping my foot waiting for somebody from facilities management to show up. So when they do finally show up at 8 o'clock, on this one, I'm expecting a signature in 15 minutes, to tell you the truth. And I know I'm never gonna get that, but there's no reason for this to go past that day. You already know you can't start your facility back up unless I do this repair. I'm giving you a class 5 estimate as soon as you show up in the morning. Sign the form so that we can get on with work. Because when you wait 3 days to sign it, then you bring it to my office, I'm gonna tell you it's off the schedule now, we don't have time. We can't do this.
I'd say that's one of the things that is managed most poorly in our industry is scope work.
Scope control in general, and this piece in particular for people in the heat of execution. Like I know any of you that have worked as a turnaround man, there is nothing more frustrating than having 8 days left in your outage, having a found work package that you know is going to take you, it's going to take you all of 6 days to cut that chunk of that vessel out and flush patch it, and it's going to take you a day to get the rolled plate. And this is sitting on the manager's desk, waiting for a signature. Don't get the signature on Tuesday, don't get it on Wednesday, don't get it on Thursday. On Friday, it's like he's giving you a bone, oh, I signed your form for you. I don't have time left to complete the scope. So the reason I wanted to bring up scope control at the end is this piece, because it ties back to that leadership and management accountability piece, right? Everybody needs to be present, right? It's not a vacation for anybody. It's not the turnaround team is in, so the rest of us are kicking back, having coffee and donuts. We need full engagement. Turnaround is an all-in affair. And it has to be if you hope to even achieve that, to strive towards excellence. We require full participation from management leadership. There just is no other way, right? Like there can't be some excuse that it takes 2 or 3 days to process a found work. Yes, the engineering manager needs to look at it, the integrity manager needs to look at it, the plant manager needs to look at it. So all you get into the plant manager's office now, look at it and sign it.
So Pete, last night we were talking and you had some good comments about management versus leadership, accountability versus responsibility, effective versus efficient. Maybe you could just kind of...
Yeah, so
throw that out there, yeah.
and that is a good
That's
one
a good
to bring up,
conversation.
because maybe people aren't really understanding what I'm talking about. I tried to cover that with not asking for the vice president to get in the weeds part. The person accountable for something is the person whose job it is to see that it gets done. that doesn't necessarily mean that's the person who's gonna do it. In fact, usually when we're having accountability discussions, it's almost never the person who's gonna do it. The person who's gonna do it is the person who's been made responsible. And he's been made responsible by the person who's accountable. And the only reason the way the person who's accountable is doing his job, or her job, is if they verify that the work that they assigned got done. That's, I mean, there's no magic to leadership and management. It's trust but verify.
But I think we're
Lock
lacking,
your job.
we're
Get out
lacking
of your
leadership
office,
though.
right?
Don't you think we're lacking leadership in business these days?
Yes.
Huh?
I feel.
Like people who are visionaries, decision makers, you know, those guys, Steve Jobs guys, right?
I feel.
We got a
people
bunch of
don't know how to
managers
lead.
that are afraid to make a decision.
I think it's just like when I showed the slide with the eat elephant slide. When you tell an operations manager he needs to build a plan for all his work for the next 10 years, he freezes up. It's not because he doesn't want to be accountable, it's because he doesn't know how to start. And I think things like this, they don't know how to start. Right? That's why I did that whole slide, whereas if you're the VP, these are the things you would look at once every 3 months to make sure your 10-year plan is ready. Right? Again, you're accountable, so you need to be verified. But it doesn't mean you're in the weeds.
I think you have to add some more meaning to the language, because the language is very confusing. And I don't think people are taking the time to actually understand what it means. So you use the term plan, that can be used as a noun and a verb.
True.
Two very different connotations. What you're actually talking about here is an integrated activity schedule
Yes.
for the next 10, 20 years.
Are you stealing Ted's thunder now? He was the one who was supposed to correct me.
We've
Yes,
we've
I
traveled
am,
a lot
that is what
together.
I'm saying, right? And I'm trying to say it in a way.
He's got a
that
cooler
if
shirt
I
than
had
me.
any corporate leaders in the room, not to scare them with.
And then ownership, to me, ownership is a very nonsensical word, because I could own this building, but if I've signed over operatorship to Best Western, then I have really no authority.
So ownership, in the sense it's used from within industry, how we as industry managers use the word ownership. Ownership is the guy who has the authority to approve the work.
Well, then say he's the authority. Don't call him the owner.
But, I mean, the industry speak for it is,
I
they
think
call
the industry
themselves
needs to
the
change.
asset owner, right?
Right,
Like,
but they need
every
to
plant
change.
manager calls himself the asset owner.
It needs to change,
It
because
does.
I want technical authorities to make a decision on data, on SAP, on scope, on what's going to happen. I don't want an owner.
That's right.
I want an authority.
That's
Right? And I want, a legislation, I don't ask for the owner of the legislation to say whether I'm compliant.
So this is what I think, and I think it's on the same track as to what you're talking about. We're in a generation where we're all preaching team.
Right.
And in fact, at the end of the 80s and into the 90s, we wanted to promote teams so badly, we fired all of our superintendents and supervisors and brought in flatline management. Because if you just let everybody do what they want, everybody's due to do exemplary work. I'm not sure what site classes those people went to, but they're not in the same classes I went to, right? So it starts there, right? Is this push for do everything with teams, but when you look at how it's really done, like and again, I'm the guy from the inside that's gonna tell you, if you think that's what's going on, it's not. The facility manager is literally the asset owner. In all cases I know of. I don't know of a facility that's running any different than that. There is precisely one person that can approve this work. Even though Integrity's told me, you will not start this high pressure contactor up again unless you put that flush patch in. Even though engineering is condemning the vessel as it sits, there is one person in the facility who can give me permission to put my crews to work. He's the asset owner. It's usually the facility manager. Some places will split it up and it'll be the production manager. Right? Ultimately, they all speak to a vice president of operations or a director of operations. That's the real asset owner in our world. But I get that calling it an asset owner is a misuse of language.
There's no teeth.
Yeah.
Asset integrity is typically responsible to the regulatory authorities, so you're right, they are the ones that,
But they have shockingly little authority.
unfortunately, you're right, they can get overridden,
Absolutely.
But-
and to their detriment, right?
Well, and that's why I talked earlier, when you're building your plan, You need to go to your leadership team and find out. I mean, we shouldn't have to ask this question. The tolerance for NCR should be zero. And maybe I'm an extremist, but I believe there should not be a pressurized fired facility running that's out of regulatory compliance. Right? And if the last 10 months of disasters throughout the US haven't brought everybody's attention to that, do you think that refinery in Philadelphia blew up because somebody was looking after the maintenance properly? Right? Yeah, I used to work an alkylation unit, just like they blew up. I used to do turnarounds in an alkylation unit. I know how those places are built. That accident only happens because somebody's not doing the job. Somebody didn't have a long-range plan on that unit. I guarantee they didn't. Because if they did, they would have known that piece of pipe was timed out. Right? In alkylation units, we even, we use heavier steel than we would normally use, and we drill like weep holes a third of the way through the pipe at all the high erosion areas, all the elbows. So the idea is a small amount of HF acid blowing in your face is a lot better than all of that. Right? All those precautions are in every alkylation unit in operation in the world, yet they managed to blow one up immediately after startup.
What was their risk-based thinking there? I look at it this way, really, you should never have an NCR if you're applying risk at the very beginning.
That's right.
So you mitigate the risks out of that process. If you follow the process, train and implement and show everybody that process, and everybody does what they're supposed to do, you won't end up with an NCR at the end. And NCRs are kind of like letting, closing the door after all the barn animals have left. There's nothing you can do about it. It's happened in the past. Good historically.
Okay, so this is a different type of NCR, right? So that is that's an execution NCR. The team did their work wrong. It's not in compliance with the engineering drawings, yada, yada, yada. Maybe they didn't do the heat treatment right. There's a million reasons you get those technical NCRs. I'm talking about the NCRs on your regulated equipment, right? Every province has rules, right? This type of vessel at this pressure and this temperature has to have a full vessel inspection every 60 months, right? If it's a light ends vessel. Sulfur plants typically every 36 months, right? It just depends where you're working. Those are the NCRs I'm talking about. Because those ones seem to still have a certain amount of management can just decide. And some companies carry NCRs as a part of their, I really hate this term, they call it, we're doing a calculated risk-based decision. That's what anytime somebody uses the word calculated risk, they're trying to blow something up. And they're hoping that they're going to be promoted and be gone before that happens. And they're going to get the accolades for saving all this money. And somebody else is going to be stuck with a blown up alky unit in the middle of Philadelphia.
So that's a great point. I also, on top of what Norm was talking about, terminology in this industry is weird because, we got shutdown, turnaround, outage, and let's throw in maintenance or pit stops, for example.
And major
There's nobody, it's like, well, what is a turnaround? Well, blah, blah, blah. Oh, what is shut, blah, blah, blah. Like, nobody knows. Oh, they're all the same. No, turnaround is asset integrity, compliance event. End of story. And it's never done at the equipment level. It's always done at either unit or train or plant, right? The shutdown is process integrity. I need to change catalyst. I need to clean. I need shit, that. Nobody's telling me to do that. That's what I need to do. I'm going to have a shutdown on a unit or a piece of equipment. Yeah.
It's one aspect of outage planning.
But I never have an unscheduled turnaround, right? Have I ever had an unscheduled turnaround? Never in the world, ever, right? But I've had lots of unscheduled shutdowns.
Yeah.
Now, when I have an outage, why am I having an outage? Because I can't perform that maintenance on stream.
Yeah.
So I need an outage. That's what an outage is. Okay, cool. Can't we just all agree on that? I can't many times we've posted this on LinkedIn, all of a sudden someone goes, yeah, well, we're gonna have a shutdown. Well, what is he gonna do? Oh, we're gonna inspect all our for compliance. Stop saying that.
That's why I champion.
I'm gonna get a new shirt that says that, yeah.
And unit outage.
So Ted, we can't get those three
I know,
together.
tell me, right?
But then we talk DFL, oh, that's 175.
Exactly.
It's 500, and then you go, well, did you put the Swamper in your schedule?
Exactly.
And the guy goes, Swamper, no, back truck, it's all good.
Yeah.
It's 1 hour. Oh, hang on a second.
No
Did you
hamburgers.
how did you do the guys on the flare stack?
Yeah.
Well, I put them in as 1. Well, it's a crew of 6.
It's a crew of 6, yeah.
So maybe, well, hang on, they showed up with a crew of 8. So, I love all the technology, but
Yeah.
we can't even get to standards that we all say, hey, if we're gonna plan 155,000 hour turnaround,
Yeah.
those are guys on the wrenches.
Yeah.
I didn't put GFs in. Oh, well, maybe
Exactly.
Well, he's an NCSO. He's walking a lot, so maybe he gets hours, right? So we do all this stuff, and I've watched it 100 times, different ways, and then we throw out these hours that what it's worth. Listen, I spent a few years at Shell, and I had the refinery guys from Quebec show up and say, we do it for $140. You, $300. How does this work, right? Well, then we started getting into the schedule. I said, no. If we're going to play this game, I want to see your resources and how you're doing. Because then we're apples to apples.
Yeah.
We can't even get within Shell to Shell.
Yeah.
So we throw numbers around. Let's be careful on what we're throwing.
Here's what I want to say on that, because your point is really good and it's been made with me before. And the people that really like to argue about is that project closing, your accountant usually likes to argue about it. So if you use the term DFL to start with is a copyrighted term. It belongs to AP Networks. Any of these things are benchmarks. You don't have to use APs. You don't have to agree with how AP calculates the DFL. You can invent your own calculation for DFL, but here's the catch. You can never change it, ever. You can never revisit it. If you're going to do benchmarking, you have to do it 100% consistent 100% of the time. So the reason I gravitate back, I'm not being paid by AP Networks. The reason I use the DFL standard is because that's a benchmark number with solid data going back to 1956. I don't argue with them. I bring up the form. I calculate my finances strictly according to AP Networks, and it spits out a benchmark number. Now we can argue whether this scaffolder was indirect or direct all we want. That's not the point. The point is, how are we executing relative to how everybody else is executing? And by creating this benchmark number back in '56, they've made it so that I can compare a gas plant to a fertilizer plant. I can compare Scotford to a refinery in Belgium. I can compare what's going on at Ted's plant in India to what's going on in Argentina, because I'm using the same benchmark, right? And the only thing that changes is the number it generates. And I'm not afraid to generate that number because, as I already confessed earlier, I've already come from an environment working with the most embarrassing DFL number you could ever generate. So I'm not afraid to calculate it anymore because I'll never see a number bigger than that. I'm convinced. Right? Like I just don't think there's anything left you could do wrong to get the number up there any higher than that. Right? But that is a good point, and it is a. It's not properly marketed. It's not. People aren't explaining it properly. And every team I ever work on, everybody wants to weigh in on how tool time is calculated.
But that's because they're very subjective in their viewpoints and their opinions, and I could go on about some TED-isms that I use all the time. But the point is, what you've just described is an objective point of view,
yes,
which we shouldn't be arguing about. We should be using and moving on and eradicating failures and dealing with the errors in our malfunctions in our processes, our data, our plants, our people. But instead, we're hung up on who's better. Our egos get in the way of these conversations.
Well, I mean, back in the mid-50s, when AP was getting their feet on the ground and they put this together and decided to start doing it that way, I suppose if you were there and you were really passionate, you could argue with them about what they included and what they didn't include. But here in 2020, I don't care what they included and didn't include anymore, just because it's a benchmark now. And it doesn't matter whether it actually represents my literal tool time cost. It only matters that I know what your DFL is and I know what his DFL is, so I know that I suck. It's just that simple. Right? I mean, that's all you're using the benchmark number for. What is me and my team? What is our relative degree of suckedness? Right? You want to get the number lower than everybody you know. Right? You're not the one that sucks.
It's areas to focus. That's what benchmarking's for.
Yeah.
That's right.
Are you competitive in a trend over those years? And there's lots of various elements that can skew that.
Well,
If
maybe
we have
you guys should
Solomon,
write
we
a
have AP
paper about
Network, and that'll
benchmarking,
classify
because
us in a DFL. It's
maybe
been
that's
used for a long
another
time.
thing that people aren't.
But shareholders love
ownership,
that
people
stuff.
aren't understanding it.
Shareholders love that stuff.
They do, and we get gravitated towards a DFL when there's a lot more metrics below that tell us where we're failing.
Yeah.
I
It's
hate
the ability
to,
to act on that information that we fail to do.
getting people to act on data is a whole other, I would do a whole different presentation for that.
So what-
I had,
you're gonna
when
write a
Ted
paper out?
invited me to this, I had a million, I said yes to him in the spur of the moment with no idea what I was gonna do here today. And then I just went through my own published work, and basically, these are the very first 2 papers I wrote. And I still stand by, these are the biggest 2 problems that I as a turnaround manager face, so that's what I presented today. But, you know, if you wanna look up my LinkedIn profile, I've done papers on cost control and contracting and scalability, and, you know, and I hope to write a lot more papers if I can get involved with more teams and learn more things, and, right, I have 40 years of background, but I'd like to collect another 40 years. So, anybody that's offering, if I get too old to learn, I'll put myself in a box.
Thanks,
Well,
Peter.
let's like to say thanks, Pete, for the excellent presentation. I always hate interrupting a good conversation, but with Dave's open mic coming up, I think there's probably a good